It's a natural human desire to want to know where we come from and how our ancestors lived.
Our roots, right? But for one local man, that journey has led to a very dark point in history. In tonight's special report, Deadly Descendant, Newsweek's Denise Rosch explains his family tree traces to a serial killer and possibly one of the greatest criminal mysteries of all time.
My great-great-grandfather is perhaps the most evil man in American history.
Like any good horror story, this one begins in a cemetery, a body exhumed after more than 120 years below ground.
H. Holmes was the name he chose to go by. His real name was Herman Webster Mudgett.
For Jeff Mudgett, facing a family secret, digging up the body of his great-great-grandfather in hopes of solving a disturbing mystery was his relative, Jack the Ripper.
We all want to know where we come from.
Mudgett, who now lives in Las Vegas, has been studying this dark branch of his family tree for 20 years, even writing a book, Bloodstains. Here's what he's learned. During the late 1800s, his great-great-grandfather, H. Holmes, paid for medical school by robbing graves, later building a Chicago hotel that history has dubbed the Murder Castle, complete with secret rooms, gas vents, and lime pits, a perfect killing spot during the Chicago World's Fair.
He and his assistants would go in, send them down a grease chute. They would land on a gurney in the basement where he had torture racks.
Mudgett says Holmes would later admit to murdering 27 people, but some historians think the number could be as high as 200, preying on lonely travelers no one would miss, a story that served as the basis for Season 5 of the popular FX series American Horror Story Hotel. Today, Holmes Hotel is long gone, a post office built on the grounds. And while Mudgett has requested to excavate a neighboring plot for human remains,
Chicago has a long history of hiding historical horrors.
So far, the government has refused. Holmes was executed in 1894, not for anything that happened in Chicago or his murder hotel, but rather for killing his partner in Pennsylvania. Which takes us back to this past spring in that cemetery outside Philadelphia, where Jeff Mudgett believes more secrets lay buried.
I know he's the Ripper. I'll never be able to have half the world agree with me on that. But I know what that evidence points to for me, and I don't have any doubts.
The story of H. Holmes has been told in an 8-part series on the History Channel entitled American Ripper. Mudgett hoping DNA evidence will prove once and for all that his great-great-grandfather was also the infamous killer Jack the Ripper, roaming the streets of London in 1888. Murders committed, Mudgett believes, while Holmes was on holiday in England. One question now, can science prove the theory?
Most often it's in bone or a tooth.
Martin Schiller is a professor with UNLV School of Life Science. While he's not involved in the Holmes analysis, he says DNA testing is certainly possible for a 120-year-old sample.
At UNLV right here, we have our Nevada Institute of Personalized Medicine has a genome sequencing lab, and we can sequence your whole genome in one day.
Unfortunately, testing has been slower in the Holmes case, and Mudgett worries his great-great-grandfather may have escaped the gallows altogether and had another body buried in his place. Either way, the search for the truth goes on. Denise Rosch, News 3.
And so the mystery continues. DNA sampling is still being done in this case. Meanwhile, Mudgett says handwriting samples from his great-great-grandfather and Jack the Ripper match.